Welcome to the Polaris Connection, a podcast for parents and families of autistic and neurodivergent children. I am your host, Brad Broyles, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Nathan Palmer.
Glad to be here, Brad. Always exciting.
Well, thank you guys for being here, and we're also thrilled to introduce Amanda Hineline.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate it.
So Amanda is a clinical director with the Ascend Behavior Partners and a Board Certified Behavioral Analyst. Amanda holds a Master's of Education with a focus in Applied Behavioral Analyst from the great Arizona State University. Go Sun Devils! And is on track to complete also your Master's in Social Work, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking today. Now you're going to Grand Canyon University right now. All right, so go Lopes, right?
Yeah.
Got the Sun Devils, and we have the Lopes here. Amanda, and kind of the reason why we want you to be here, and we're so excited, you have a very unique passion.
Yes.
For bridging ABA and social work. Amanda, tell us about this. Why are you so passionate with working in the social work industry and that?
Yeah, a lot of just my passion comes from having worked with foster kids, both employed and just volunteer and stay in touch with them, and really seeing the discrepancies of where they're viewed by their behavior, not so much for who they are and what they've been through and the resilience that they've had from what they've been experiencing. And so my passion is just for them to be seen and be supported for all that they are.
Well, and also on your bio, I see here that you've dedicated to support foster youth while also educating professionals on the impact of trauma. And I'm really excited that we're going to be talking about this. There's that's a very unique skill set of itself with the language of behavior. She serves also on the Foster Care Review Board in Maricopa County. So we'll have to talk a little bit more detail about it. And then also, just to tell everybody, you will be speaking at the annual conference with the AZABA conference here in November. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm very excited about that.
I can't wait to hear, and I hope everybody's ready for that as well. And one thing I love that, and I think your presentation is going to be the topic is no such thing as a bad kid.
Yeah, so really reframing that behavior as more of communication, that there's something that's a need that's missing, a skill that needs to be taught, or something is just wrong, and that's where the behavior is coming out in place of that communication.
And Brad, I don't know this is just coincidence, because we literally just concluded a podcast where our guest, superpower was seeing kids for who they are, and her mantra is, there is no such thing as a bad kid. So I'm loving this trend, and I think it's something we just need to echo out there and just, I hate to say branding it, there's no such thing as a bad kid. And I love meeting people that have that perspective, because it's not looking at the kid as the problem, but it's something else that we can use to help the child.
Yeah.
Every episode we come up with a new brand, and that's starting to become a good theme, right? There's no such thing as a bad kid, and that's so true. Before we talk more about your presentation at AZABA conference, tell us a little bit, how did you get into the passion of foster care work?
I guess it kind of all started back in my undergrad, back in Washington. In college, I had watched a TED Talk on the adverse childhood experiences by Dr. Nadine Burke, talking about really how her experience of observing trauma and the long-term effects that it has. And then from there, I've just been researching trauma. How does it impact brain development, the intensity, the duration, the age that it happens? And then about almost 3 years ago, I started working part-time at a group home here in Arizona, working with foster kids. There's about 10 kids in the home, ages from, I think the youngest at the time was 4 up to 17. And just hearing their stories, getting to know them, seeing how staff interacted with them, just really grew a passion for that. Since then, I've gone back to school for social work, and then I've stayed in touch with a husband and wife that own a nonprofit and do other work. And then I've actually been able to stay in touch with the foster kids that were in the home. The company I worked for had lost their contract with the state, so the kids all got displaced. Some went into foster homes, some went into other group homes, a group of siblings that I've known. And actually in my presentation, I share a little bit about their stories to give relevancy and to really share the impact of these are real stories of kids. but a group of siblings, they're all teenagers. I just saw them last weekend. I took them to brunch, but they just got adopted by the foster home that took them in. And they've been in and out of group homes and foster homes for the last, I think the girl that's 17, she first got removed when she was 6 years old. So back and forth with a lot. Sorry if I get emotional.
No. This is an emotional podcast. I mean, this is the emotional topic. I mean, It impacts more families than you think.
Yeah.
Well, and if I could ask a question, Amanda, because you're touching on something that I'm becoming more aware of and seeing more and more. This idea of trauma, right? And historically, my understanding is even getting that identified as a thing, that we could pursue as its own classification has been a hard process. That's separate from anxiety. That's separate from PTSD, and even down to generational trauma, right? Where it passes from parents to children, and seeing that as its own area. Where I'm intrigued is your practice background is applied behavior analytics, or ABA.
Yeah.
And for everybody out there, we typically associate ABA is for autism, ABA is for autism,
Yes.
but you're talking about something different. Does ABA also apply to trauma or other types of behavioral conditions?
Oh, definitely. I mean, as BCBAs, we know all behaviors communication. If I'm biting you, if I'm throwing something at you, and I'm not telling you with my words, but I'm doing it with my actions, there's something that I'm dysregulated about. There's a skill set I'm
Nathan
missing.
always gets upset that I keep biting him, So I'll stop that, Nathan. I'm sorry. Keep going.
No, it's okay. But really, I mean, behaviors communication. When we work with young autistic children, I did an assessment yesterday. The child got upset. He doesn't have the verbal communication to tell me what happened. We know because we observed as I closed the computer, he couldn't look at pictures. He started banging his head. He was hitting himself in the face with his closed fists. He was flopping to the floor. He was banging his hands on the ground, screaming, crying, stomping his feet. Like, we know he's trying to communicate something that he doesn't have the verbal language. A lot of people, I think, overlook kids that have gone through trauma, say, oh, it's a 9-year-old. They have the skill. They can tell me what's wrong. They're a typical developing kid. But they don't look and see when he was 4 or 5, dad assaulted him and exposed him to different things. And then he's in and out of group homes and getting in fights and being bullied. And he's, he's 9 years old and he can't read. Like, how's he going to communicate what's wrong? And so I think with as BCBAs, we can approach trauma the same way we would as another child that's having behaviors. What behavior are they exhibiting? What skill set are they missing? What's their developmental age versus their chronological age? And I think with that, there's a lot of possibility that we could have a really big impact on.
I love that. I mean, it's enough for an adult to be able to communicate a history of trauma, let alone a child to put words and meaning to that. And so what you said, I mean, I'm stuck on this idea that behavior is communication.
Yeah.
Right. Because that makes me go, okay, well then it's a language. And so now you're making me rethink ABA is not just an approach to development. ABA is learning and applying new language skills to better understand how our children are communicating with us and how we can better communicate with them. So I love it.
I mean, that's what we always try to do. What is a maladaptive behavior that's meeting a need, escaping from something, access to something, attention to something, and what is an appropriate replacement we can teach that's more socially appropriate that can get that same function and need met, but in a more safe, healthy way.
So backing up, how would you define trauma? I'm always big on definition. I don't have the dictionary up, but how would you define trauma?
Yeah, I do think the word sometimes gets overused with more simple things, I guess. I would say if it's impacting a child's communication, functional level, impacting their health in some way, that's impacting their ability to function in their daily life. It's an event or a series of events that causes harm. In all the research I've been doing, maltreatment and neglect is the biggest one. Neglect is really by far, it's the worst. It's the highest rate of between abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. Neglect is the worst. But what people don't realize is neglect is the absence of parenting or taking care of a child, to where then the child is exposed to harm or other things. I mean,
what are some signs that a child will give you that they have been neglected, that are raised to a level of trauma?
Yeah. I mean, some of the just what you can observe and see. I think as behavior analysts or just as people observing, are they more withdrawn? Are they do they have where when there's access to food, do they hoard food? Are they not being fed regularly, so they're seeking out and hoarding food? Are they more quick to react to something? Is their engagement with you just not to the level of what it used to be? If you try to have a communication with them, they're withdrawn, they're not responding, especially little kids that are not like a child that's under a year old. When they've been crying and no one comes to seek their needs, they really stop crying. Wow. And so when you go to like engage them, they're kind of, mom leaves and the child's unaffected.
So they kind of learn naturally how to defend for themselves emotionally. Yeah. So again, that's why they do the withdrawn. They do like, I'm not going to continue with my emotion because I'm already withdrawn from. Yeah.
And neglect signs are, lack of being bathed, lack of being taken care of, lack of education. Some of the kids I've done volunteer work with, they come into the home and their hair's covered in lice. Ooh. Where they have to get basically their hair cut because they can't do enough treatments to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. They have cigarette burns. They have other things. They're malnutrition or malnourished, I guess, is the word. And really just they're very distrusting. They're not listening to what you're saying. They're often lying about things. Lying is a big reaction to a lot. You ask a child, what did you do or did you do this? And they'll say no, even if there's nothing that they're going to get in trouble from, but because the lying has become a survival mechanism.
Wow. So I'm curious. You have this profession, right? I'm listening to your bio, right? You get your degree. You have your master's in education. Mm-hmm. Now you're looking for a master's in social work, but you're a Board Certified Behavior Analyst or a BCBA, right, with behavior analytics. Was that field of, I'm going to say non-traditional ABA, like was that decided before you got into the career, or was it something you stumbled into afterwards?
More afterwards. I've always loved working with kids. That's really the only job I've done my whole life, is some aspect of working with kids, but really just seeing where there's gaps in foster care, especially working in the home. I mean, the group of siblings that I talk about, I think they went through 8 case managers in 6 months. So every change of case manager, you have to retell the story. You have to say what's going on. The kids start telling the social worker, "Oh, you didn't ask us if we went to a dentist appointment. You didn't ask us if we did this." Like they start quizzing them, and they just, they're already disrupted from a home, from parents who are not giving them attention, meeting their needs. They come into a system that's disrupted multiple times by either placements, by case managers, and so they are distrusting. And so seeing that, hearing their stories, it gave me a passion of like, I'm seeing these behavior changes. The staff that work with them in the group home have maybe high school education, maybe a bachelor's. I came in with a master's and they were like, do you want a higher job? And I was like, no, I just want to work with the kids. And they were like, I got paid minimum wage, even, less than an RBT would. And they know nothing about behavior. They're in there just to basically babysit the kids. And so I'm seeing all these gaps in the social work side. And it's like, okay, as a BCBA, I really understand behavior. What can I come in? What can I teach these professionals? How can I really bridge the two together? Because the fields are so parallel. I mean, even just our ethics codes, they're very similar in kind of what our focus of both fields are. And social work, they don't just work with foster kids. They work in all other professions of health, of humanities and stuff like that. But I mean, with foster kids, they're really such a vulnerable population. And I feel like there's a lot less service and work that goes into supporting them. Versus, with BCBAs, we're all required to have master's degrees. Social workers aren't. Case managers aren't. They could be out of high school. They can have bachelors, depending on what level and area they work. And so then that's what drove me to get the social work. Not necessarily that I needed it to work in that field, but I want to understand what they're being taught, what gaps and they have, and what their perspective is, and then bridge the two to help educate both.
That's Amanda, I'm glad that we're friends, because I feel like that you're going to go to heaven sooner than me. And I'm glad that at least I have somebody advocating me. It's like, well, I knew Brad. Yeah. He tried hard, but maybe not. But no, that is impressive that you're like, hey, listen, I'm not only am I going to understand BCBAs and
Yeah.
understand that from that master standpoint. But now going back again to get a master in social work, just the fact that you want to understand the gaps.
Yeah.
That is...
One of my
that's pretty cool.
classes was on behavior and actually talked about ABA of one of like 8 or 10 other behavioral type therapies. But it was like, it was touched on a few sentences in one of my textbooks.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we have such an in-depth knowledge of understanding behavior, teaching new behaviors, testing development, things like that. Why would you not spend more time?
So let me ask a maybe a more pointed question. You're talking about bridging and providing maybe strategies or philosophies that kind of help to address these populations, and specific in this area of trauma, which I kind of want to sit on for a second.
Yeah.
What are a couple winning strategies that even parents can apply, right? Because this is a community-wide issue that's it's just becoming more and more prevalent, and so. Short of me going, well, I'm going to also do what Amanda did and go to school and get my master's and learn all these trades and do behavior analytics, what are some tools, I guess, and I know there's a lot of them, but that you've seen that are effective and maybe impactful, specific to groups that have that trauma or generational trauma or complex trauma that you're talking about?
I think really the first one is establishing communication. I mean, as behavior is communication, we need a way that some of that more spontaneous communication can be developed. Working in ABA, we do a lot of work with speech pathologists and different providers and really trying to establish, is there a good mode of communication? And then really self-regulation is probably the next biggest one, I would say. A lot of times, the kids that have experienced this significant trauma or repeated experiences of trauma, disruption, what people don't realize is that, being just removed from the home with their parents, that can be a traumatic event. Like that in itself is harmful. And so another big one is self-regulation. A lot of professionals, parents, providers will talk down to a child in a sense of like, you're escalated, you're yelling, you're throwing things, I'm going to punish you, I'm going to discipline you, I'm going to talk to you about like what you're doing wrong while you're screaming at me. What a lot of people don't realize is kids are in that fight or flight response. And so they're, your brain kind of develops from the bottom up. And so when you're in that fight or flight response, your brainstem is really the biggest area that's active. It's responding if there's a real threat. The cognitive part of your brain is more offline. You're not able to process, if I punch you, I'm going to get suspended. Like, you're not thinking through those consequences. And so a lot of what we as BCBAs understand, if a child's trying to bite me, I need to first regulate them. I need to help them kind of come back to a state where they can be regulated, they feel safe, and then I can start teaching them skills.
Well, I like that you're looking at the individual, not the behavior in a way. You're like, okay, this is just a kid. Let's deregulate him a little bit, and then let's get to the real cause.
I'll give you an example. The 9-year-old I worked in the group home, the one that I was saying had some pretty significant trauma. His dad actually took him. He couldn't handle his behaviors. His girlfriend at the time made him choose, you either pick me or you pick him. He chose the girlfriend. He took him to DCS.
That sounds like a great girlfriend.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, he has challenging behaviors, but dad took him to DCS, gave up his own parental rights, said, I don't want him back. So he's in a group home. He's been moved around for his behaviors. He doesn't know how to read, and he doesn't know how to read. He maybe knows how to identify letters. His response to everything is, I'll cuss you out, I'll fight you. He was suspended from school. He'd get in fights at school. He'd get in fights in the group home. There was one night, and he was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder. The staff in the home looked at him of, you're a problem child. There was one night in the home that I was there, and he wanted candy at 9 o'clock at night for a snack. And I was like, no, you can't have candy. Like, it's time for bed. Gave me every cuss word you can think of, slammed the fridge, picked up the broom, swinging it around, hitting on the walls, punching things. He goes back to his room, and I'm not reacting. I'm not giving him any kind of like, no, don't do that. You're going to be in trouble. You're going to get, this taken away, this response.
And no punishments.
No, because also I can't reason with him. He's in that fight or flight response. He's not thinking of his consequences. He's just reacting. He goes back to his room, and he's literally like sitting on the edge of his bed, like waiting for someone to come punish him. And I was like, he's in that fight or flight response. Later on, he calmed down, and I talked with him, and I was like, hey, this is why I didn't give you candy at 9 o'clock at night. But a lot of people are like, in that moment, they would have been like, no TV, go to your room, you're going to be in trouble,
Grounded
this privilege is
forever.
gone.
Yeah,
But he
and
lock you
can't
up.
process. And so that's where self-regulation is so important, and communication.
I was going to say that's like looping back to he's communicating.
Yes.
And it almost seems like then the adults match that communication.
Yeah.
They respond with their own limbic brain and
Yes.
getting triggered and doing the same defiance, but in an
Yeah.
authoritative way because they can, because they're the adult.
Yeah.
Even though they're acting like a child.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is give them different tools to communicate, teach them positive communication, different expressive tools. And that's,
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, and then also I think as BCBAs, we're really big on what antecedents can we manipulate? What are precursor behaviors to some of this? Like you can see with most every kid and even adults, you can see like, okay, I said this, you're a little irritated, you're a little frustrated, you're gonna, if I keep pushing your buttons, you're eventually gonna get mad and yell at me or throw something or do this. Sometimes parents are like, oh, this happened out of the blue, but there's usually a buildup. It could be very subtle, could be very quick. And the same thing is for foster kids. They're, because of the age that the trauma happened, the intensity, the duration, it likely impacted how their brain developed.
Yes.
By the time kids are 5, I think it's like 90% of their brains developed. And so it's like the majority of brain development happens at such a young age. And the kids that are under 1 year old, I've been, like for my presentation, I've been finding different research. And it's like under 1 year old is like 50% more, like the most kids that are impacted than any other age. It's like half of the abuse, neglect, trauma happens when you're under 1 year old. So if you think about how much brain development is happening just even under 5 years old, this 9-year-old does not have self-regulation skills, doesn't have good communication skills. I mean, if he can't even read, how is he comprehending things well? He can't do reading comprehension. How's he comprehending just a conversation?
Right.
And then if he's in this fight or flight response because all the trauma that happened over several years, he's never been taught appropriate skills. If his only exposure to parents have been parents who neglected and abused
Right.
him, and then group home staff, no one's ever sat down and taught him skills.
Right.
So I'm taking this two ways because on half of my brain, Amanda, is going,
Sorry, I know that's a lot.
No, by 5, like, well, it's over. My brain's formed and just live with it. But you're in a profession for a reason. So what's the, okay, yeah, but what's the hope? Like, what can I do?
I know. I was
just,
like getting so sad. I'm like, oh man, these kids are just done.
like, oh, well, my kid's 8. Dang, I missed the window. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
Now what? I have to believe that
Yeah.
there's a way to still program or learn
Oh,
or
definitely there is.
Okay, so tell us about that side.
I mean, the opposite of trauma is resilience. If a kid can develop resilient skills, it can, the trauma is never going to go away.
Right.
I heard an analogy and it was like, if you pee in a cup and you add a bunch of sugar, it's not going to take out the pee. Kind of talking about trauma. Sorry if that's a little inappropriate. But I had heard that, and it's kind of like, the experience, the trauma, it's always going to be there. But you can teach skills on top of it, and you can really building connection, building safe relationships, building stability, helping them communicate, helping them just process through that. Really, the thing with resilience that they found most common is if that person can have a consistent caregiver or an adult in their home that really it stays around and isn't just in and out of their life. That consistency of a person that's like, this person cares about me, this person sees that I'm for more, it adds a lot to that.
Well, we in our previous episode, I remember talking to Dr. Griffith, and she talked about before she would even do assessments, she would look at their environment that they were in, positive connections in their lives. So it's almost, and that's what they would look at before they would do any kind of assessments or diagnosis. And so it's kind of like in the way with these foster kids, which is really difficult.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, let's get them into a better environment the best way we can. Let's work on some connections, some positive connections. And then it's like, okay, now I can start helping a little bit more deeper with some of these. So like with trauma, for example, you said that the opposite of trauma is resilience. Mm-hmm. Are you saying that does resilience fix trauma? Is it a fix, or is it more of how do I deal with it moving forward, or how? Explain more about how that works.
I wouldn't say it fixes trauma, but I would say it helps combat the trauma experiences. You know, the group of siblings I worked with, when there's 5 in the home at a time between the ages of 11 and 17, they had an older brother who aged out, another one moved in. They've been in and out of the system since they were babies, 5, 6 years old. You know, in the group home, they were failing grades, skipping school, all of that. They got moved into a foster home placement. The boy that had the worst grades, A's and B's, basketball team, all this stuff. You know, the stability in the environment really just helps a lot. That consistency, that predictability, that if you do something, like if you mess up, I'm not going to beat you. I'm not going to cuss you out. I'm not going to ignore you. Like, a lot of these kids will do some of the behaviors they do also to seek attention.
Yes.
You know, if you always have a parent ignoring you and they only pay attention to you when you do bad things, that tells me I get more attention when I mess up and do things.
Yeah. And you know, I know there's a lot of, you know, sometimes ABA is talked about as like a reward affirming model, right? Mm-hmm. But I think what I'm hearing in the underlying of that is that, you know, trauma is the result of that neglect or abuse, right? It's that negative form of punitive affirmation for behavior.
Yeah.
Just as much as that can be programmed, the opposite is true.
Yeah.
We can use resilience and love and hope and optimism to program different responses. And so a reward-based system really is just the opposite of a trauma response.
Yeah.
Cool.
So the 17-year-old, the oldest sister of the sibling, she's a senior this year. And she's on track to graduate and is talking about college. You know, kids that age out of foster care, whether, you know, if they're not in a stable environment or home.
What age is that when they're
18?
18.
I think you can choose to stay in it until you're like 21 and do like supportive living and things like that. A lot of kids don't want to. If they've had a lot of disruptions, they're like, I'm done with this system. The system themselves failed them. But it's like, if you age out of the system, the likelihood you're going to be homeless, incarcerated, or pregnant is like 25 to 30% by the time you're 21.
Wow.
And so, you know, if you can compare that, like, there's a whole bunch of deep dives you can do into that.
Yes.
The system of incarceration, the homeless population, you know, the generational trauma of young kids having a baby that then they're not old enough and able to take care of, that ends up back in the foster care system. And so I think, like, if you can create a good, stable, predictable environment that is like loving, you know, obviously they still need discipline. You're not going to, understanding the trauma and the behavior doesn't remove the discipline, but it changes how you discipline and maybe, you know, how you approach that. Not all discipline is going to work the same for every child. But I think with like the 17-year-old, like, you know, she's been in and out of the system since she was 6. And for her to be like, I want to go to school. She was talking about wanting to do neuroscience, or now she was saying she maybe wants to become a pilot. Like, for her to be like, there's more for me, a lot of that has to do with the adult relationship she has. She and her siblings have been connected to a woman and her husband who own a nonprofit here in Arizona, that they do a lot of work and consistency with foster kids. And so they've been involved.
So on that one, just was it her connection with the right foster family that really kind of helped pave that way and work? Or was it your work? Like, how, because we see some foster kids are not making that connection, but others are.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
I think a mix of both. For her, she got really involved in the church too. So for her, that faith kind of gave her an aspect of hope. But then the husband and wife, the nonprofit they own, it's called True Pursuit. And, you know, just having that stability. Like, when they've messed up, the woman, her name's Angel. She is truly an angel.
Thank you, Angel.
Yeah, I know. So I'll have to tell her I spoke about her on this podcast. But really, like, she's someone that she's like, I will love you no matter what, but I'm also going to discipline you like a mom would. Like, I'm going to have those hard conversations with you. When you're caught in the foster home you're in, getting drunk off your foster parents' alcohol, I'm going to talk with you. I'm going to talk with you about the discipline. I'm going to tell you that's not okay. But I'm going to also love you. And I'm going to continue to show up even after you've messed up. Because I think a lot of times foster kids are afraid, if I mess up, they're going to take me away. And so having that consistency, you know, and then I think the foster home she's in now, like, they're a really loving couple and they've been great. The husband and wife are wonderful. They're really supportive. They have the ups and downs. I mean, they have right now, they have 4 teenagers, 13 to 17.
Yeah, like, that would stress, that's trauma by itself.
They went from one child that's an adult now to taking in 5 teenage foster kids. Like, it, you know, changed things. But like, that consistency, that stability, that predictability of, hey, you always have this person. I've stayed in touch with them. I see them often. They always can reach out to me, like if there's anything that's needed. So them knowing like, hey, I have an adult, I have someone that loves me, that I trust, that's safe for me, like just that kind of helps rebuild attachment and connection and support.
So let me shift gears just a little bit. You've talked a lot about, I love this idea of ABA reimagined, and I mean that maybe you could brand your own company. You're
that was the conference in January I spoke at.
ABA reimagined.
Yeah.
So we can't take credit on that one because we always come up with some point where it's saying so we won't take that one.
That's a good one. It's a great one.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's part of why we took this vision with Polaris Academy. It was, you know, as a parent, like there's got to be more you can do than just the clinical application. And so just what we've done in academics was a little bit of a deviation. What you're doing in foster is amazing. It obviously has an impact in work. So we've talked about methodologies for like trauma specific. Parents everywhere listening, I mean, it's hard not to be inspired by what you're saying.
Yep.
What are some tools that parents could use? Because it's not like every parent can take a break and go, I'm going to become certified in ABA.
Oh, definitely not.
Right?
And have a master's degree and all that.
And short of having them become a therapist because they should always be parents first, but what are some winning strategies you've seen in like the autism spectrum world that would be helpful for a parent to know?
Yeah, the company I work for, we actually have several kids that are in foster, or essentially foster kids, but like have been adopted by grandma or are being under the care of their aunt or grandparents, things like that. You know, really as the parent or guardian, you know your child best. Really, the biggest thing I work with parents on is advocating. You know your child best. You know, what's their baseline of their behavior, their communication? Is that changing? Okay, advocate. What do you need? What supports do you need? If your therapy is not right, advocate. Do you need a change? And then really for them, like, you know, take it day by day. I think sometimes it can be very overwhelming, you know, as therapists, BCBAs, we come in, we work, and we leave. Like we're not in that 24/7. You know, getting the supports of respite care of other people to come in and help support, but then also just being able to, you know, work with your child. What can I help with their communication? What can I help to self-regulate? But not looking of like, okay, I'm going to do this for the next week. Like take it moment by moment, day by day. But then really just advocate, bring in other trusted providers, you know, share that ones that you can trust to share what happened. The more knowledge that we have as BCBAs, the better we can also help too. That's something that I think is challenging with foster kids is sometimes people are too scared to tell what's happened to this child because then people won't want them. And so I think with some parents, it's like, you know, you have a very hard role. I'm not a mom. I want to be a mom one day. But I think as parents, you know, you need to understand that what you're doing is a very needed and important role. And just working with your child, you know, working with them on the self-regulation, the communication, but then really looking, is there something that's changed? Advocating for them if they can't advocate for their own needs.
Well, and kind of going back on the trauma and work on the foster care, and maybe we've said that and I've missed it. This is all with autistic kiddos. So how do you identify that this trauma or this kid is autistic if they haven't been clinically diagnosed, if they haven't done an assessment? Is there a difference, and how would you approach that?
It's hard to say if there's a difference. Again, I would just more look at like what's changing from their baseline. If they've always enjoyed this activity and now they're withdrawing. If there's an increase in self-injury behavior, you know, a child will communicate. If you're taking a child to therapy or you're taking them to school and they used to love it and now every time they go to get on a bus, it's a huge meltdown tantrum. It may not mean that there's trauma, but something happened. They're trying to communicate something with you.
Well, because on this, I've heard that, you know, with the foster care. Hey, and I just want to make a public service announcement. It's actually raining right now in Arizona. So, but going back,
hallelujah.
I know, hallelujah.
I know.
Happens once in every other podcast, right? So, but the other thing is like part of the reason why I was so fascinated with you is identifying autism in the foster care community.
Yeah.
From what I've read and what I've researched is that is tricky.
Yeah.
A lot of foster parents, like you said, they might take in a child or maybe a caseworker missed it. So how do you drive awareness so that foster parents or the foster care community knows how do we do these assessments and that we can provide the best resources for these children?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great perspective. So I'll say this a little bit about data, because of what I've been researching to put it into perspective of like maybe how many foster kids also have autism. So the Child's Bureau, I think it's the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, their most recent U.S. data was 2023. There was 4.4 million reports sent to CPS, DCS to do investigations that involved almost 8 million children, which is crazy amount of kids. So there was almost 8 million. It was 7.7 something. So there was almost 8 million children investigated. About half of those were screened out, saying there wasn't a report needed.
Was this within 1 year?
Yes.
Wow.
Across the U.S. About half of those were screened out, half were screened in, saying they need an investigation, they need a response, something. Trickling down about, I think 550,000, give or take, were then removed from their home. And currently, about any day, there's about 400,000 kids across the U.S. in foster care, meaning like kinship placement, placed with aunt, uncle, grandparent, non-kinship, so with like a trusted family friend, teacher, other provider, or group home, which is the least preferred but supportive for children that need it. So if you take 400,000 kids in foster care, and I think the autism rate is 1 in 31, there's a significant amount of kids that likely have autism. The hard thing is symptoms of trauma and autism symptoms can sometimes look really similar.
And that's where kind of the rub is. So how do you
So I think
navigate it?
Really as providers, and I wish more providers would do this, looking at the child, trying to assess where they are developmentally. It may not mean they're autistic or there's a diagnosis needed, but look at where they are developmentally. What skills are they lacking? And then looking, okay, does this need further assessment by a psychologist to see if this is autism? Are they lacking skills? Is this because of trauma? Is this because they have autism? What is that?
Right.
And so I think really like getting evaluated is kind of a first step, talking with their their provider, really advocating with the social worker or their case manager to get those assessments and things done. All the kids, a lot of our kids with autism, they teach us for trauma informed. We should assume that there's been something that happened. I know assent with kids with autism is become a big thing of really like, okay, when I go to approach this child and I'm going to help kind of prompt them, if they pull away from me, I'm not going to physically like move their hand and keep them working. I need to follow their lead. And so I think, helping understand like, it's hard because, you want to look at the baseline of where their behavior is, not their chronological age of where they should be responding. So looking at like, what skills do they have? What skills are they lacking? How are they communicating needs? And then, trying to get assessments in place to then say, this is where they're lacking. They're not making growth in this area. Let's see a psychologist to get further evaluation and assessment.
Well, and, we talk about doing assessments and diagnosis, not as a way to, hey, I need to diagnose this child, but it's to open doors to help discover their talents. How can I, open opportunities for them?
Yeah.
What opportunities do you see with an autistic? So if I get an autistic diagnosis with a child in foster care, what opportunities do they get access to?
Yeah.
If that's a good way to say it.
Yeah. And this is where I'm still learning because of what I've gotten different reports, I guess. But like most of them will get a behavior coach, which is very fascinating because working in the group home, several of the kids had a behavior coach. It's not like an RBT. It's not someone trained. It's like a mentor. Doesn't understand behavior.
Hey, hold on. So they get a behavior coach, but the coach doesn't really quite understand the behavior. So it's like having like a quarterback coach from an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Just kind of like when my PE teacher was my math teacher in school.
I think so. Yeah. And they get some level of training, but I don't think that it's like what an RBT would do because you're not overseen by a BCBA. Okay. So it's an agency that's kind of more of like a mentor. So they can get things like that. They can get other services like speech, OT, some of those. What I've been learning with the company that I work for is access plans in Arizona. Actually, if you have a referral from your doctor, you can get, ABA services. And
even if you don't have a formal autism diagnosis.
Correct. Yeah. So you don't need any diagnosis for access plans, and all foster kids are on state Medicaid insurances. And so you can get access to ABA. You may need a referral from your provider. You may need to show where there's certain behaviors, which is where the ABA is necessary. But you don't need, we have a few clients, you don't need that formal diagnosis. Some may have an autism diagnosis, some may not. But it really is, the diagnosis is never to label a child. And I think that as professionals, we need to get away of like, this child has oppositional defiance, so they're a troubled kid. Like, we need to use the diagnosis to better understand the child's skills.
Right.
Looking at them for their unique strengths, their unique abilities, and then their challenges, and teach where they have skill deficits, the same way we do currently in ABA with autistic kids. What are the skill deficits? What do we need to teach? What skills lacking? What are their strengths that we can add to? And I think as parents too, autistic children, whether they have had trauma or not, sometimes have unique interests as well. You want to honor those even as foster kids. So if you're taking in a child, you want to honor those things as much as you can.
And I love that philosophy. I think it was Stephen Covey that said, first seek to understand, then seek to be understood, right?
Yeah.
So what you're saying is we need to make an effort to understand what they're communicating, understand what the underlying things are before we get responsive, so that we're responding in the right way. It's an informed response instead of a reactive one.
Yeah. Because I think what I always try to teach people with all the kids I've worked with, the more you understand their story, the more you understand what they've been through, it gives you so much more compassion for the child. There's a girl that I worked with. She had some horrible, significant trauma put on to her by her mom. And it's just like, she's a really spunky girl. She's full of life. She's definitely got a sassy attitude. But you look at her and you're like, you've been through all of this. This helps me understand maybe why you react in these ways, or why you're displaying these like early sexual behaviors that kids shouldn't, but it helps me say, okay, I have compassion for you. It's not taking away any kind of discipline or any kind of things. Like when she's done lying or she's done different things, like she would still get disciplined and there would be consequences, but it's met with an understanding of, this is what you've been through. Now I have compassion for you and I can help you. And I think as providers, we need to look at it through that light.
And this might be out of the blue, and so I'm sorry if it's an unfair question, but I can't help but wonder, like as a parent, I'm hearing you talk and it rolls off so easy. Hey, we just need to understand. We need to, X and Y could equal Z that you're doing now. Yeah. But are there some resources, like for a parent, whether it's a book or site, that we can educate ourselves a little bit better on helping to see or identify those antecedent behaviors, or helping to interpret some of these things, just so one, we become better informed, and two, we're better equipped to respond even when we do understand? Because it's one thing to understand, okay, I get why you're communicating through this behavior, but what do I do with that, right? So how can we educate ourselves to know what are some of those tools and resources to make me a better responder or parent?
Yeah, great question. I think just as parents, being able to understand where their child's maybe needing some support is like the CDC milestones. They do great of like, at these ages, these are skills your child should and shouldn't have. Tantrums should look like at this age. These are some typical developing behaviors.
How do I find those? I didn't even know those existed.
I didn't even know that existed.
I'm
like, shoot, I hope my tantrums aren't like that.
The Center for Disease Control, they have developmental milestones by age. I think it goes up to 5 years. You can actually go on and see like which in each domain skills that a child should be starting to have.
Okay.
And then I think taking that as a parent, okay, does my child have some of these skills? Yes. Are they doing some of these? And then, your wellness check with your 2-3-year-old, with your doctor, talking about that, trying to get some early intervention services. In Arizona, I know we have Arizona Early AZIP, so EIP, Early Intervention Program. And so birth to 3 years old, parents, if their child they don't need a diagnosis, I believe. If your child's just delayed in areas, they can go there and they can get speech and OT and I think some feeding support, different things. And so looking for that resource. As far as like books or other things, I may have to get back to you on that one. I don't know any off the top of my head.
I think that CDC,
but I think just starting to look of like, and because I've met parents that have never been around kids prior that, have a child and they're like, I don't know what he or she's supposed to be doing. I had a parent whose child talked very minimally. And then one day he just like, it all came out. And he was like, why, Mom? Why is this like this? Why is this? She's like, is he supposed to be talking this much? Like, she went from not really understanding to then like, is this normal? Is this not?
Well, that's such a common thing with, especially with new parents. So, we have 6 kids, and I remember my second child, she just crawled later.
Yeah.
Like, she just crawled more, and she just wasn't interested in like walking.
Yeah.
And I remember like she was a little bit older, and I was like, well, maybe we need to go get her checked, or maybe there's something wrong with her. And so we did that. And the doctor's like, no, she'll walk when she's ready.
Yeah. And
but you just don't know sometimes as a parent, right? And then the more kids you have, or the more you're around kids, you're like, yeah, they'll kind of figure it out. So I mean, but to your point, like, what is the difference of like, hey, they're just going to figure it out, we'll just let them go for it, rather than like, no, I need to do something here. Like, where's that line?
I would definitely go to their healthcare provider for that piece. As we learn in ABA, like, you want to, rule out any medical stuff. And so I would go. I mean, as parents, especially if I have 3 brothers, I'm number 2 in the mix. Me and my older brother, very much opposites. I'm very much the easygoing child. He was not. My brother after me is similar to my older brother. They're all great in their own ways. We all have our strengths and challenges. But I think, trying to not compare too much between kids, but more look of like, okay, if these are developmental stages of about the age they should do it, are they starting to do some of it, starting to versus not at all, and they haven't even done the ones 6 months ago that they were supposed to have met, that's where I would go to your medical provider.
And that's good guideline, because again, talking about these different, like with the CDC guidelines, sometimes parents might misunderstand and say, hey, I'm looking at this, my child's like, there's something wrong. You're like, no, it's just something that you want to be aware of.
Yeah, and medical providers are great at like, hey, this might be something to look out for. If we're not seeing progress in this area in 6 months, let's now get you an evaluation. So I think using that as a guide, as a tool, and then being able to, and kind of comparing of maybe other kids that are similar ages from just what parents observe, but then going to your provider of like, I have these questions, concerns. And then if that provider is not listening and not hearing what you're saying, go somewhere else, get another opinion. Don't just take what the provider maybe says at face value. Like, you can do some research, not too many rabbit holes, but, go to a provider that you trust, someone that you're like, I value their opinion. Are they telling me just their opinion, or are they basing this off like these skill sets? And I think most providers for kids, if you ask for like, what are developmental milestones, I'm sure that they have pamphlets and things too.
And I think there's a certain degree of trust your intuition.
Yeah.
As parents, we are always second guessing ourselves. Just to know there is a benchmark resource, that doesn't mean that this is the absolute. If you didn't meet it, there's now problems. But it's good to just have some awareness. But at the end of the day, I've learned, you're a parent and there's insights you're going to have. Just trust your gut. There's some value to that.
Yeah, there is. Well, Amanda, I feel like I can talk to you all day. Like, wow, this has been incredible. You've opened up a topic that is sensitive. I know we've always wanted to have a topic about foster care and autism, and how we help with our foster care community. How do we reach out to them to help them identify autism? You brought a new component with trauma. That's fascinating within itself. I've learned a lot on it. What would be something that you would like to leave our audience with? Something like that you would recommend our parents to do, or something that if you're, hey, I have a child that is witnessing trauma, how's the best way to give them resources? What would you like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, I think just, trying to take the time to understand your child where they're at, and know that like some of these things can't be fixed overnight and they will take time. And I think, as a parent, you are the biggest advocate for your child. That's what I tell the families that I work with. At the end of the day, we're here to support you and your family. We're not here to just take charge. You know what's best. We're going to give you our professional opinion and our reason why, our assessments that support. But really, you are that biggest advocate for your child for as long as they're in, till they become an adult. And then sometimes you may still advocate for them. But I think just knowing, like what you said, trust your gut. Like, if something's changed, if something feels different, or they used to like this activity and now it's changed, or, but then also just looking at your child beyond what the behavior is. I think sometimes parents or professionals might be like, oh, he's just acting out, or he's just, he makes himself mad. And it's like, but what is beyond the surface level of that behavior? What are they really trying to communicate? As behavior analysts, we know behavior is communication. There's something that is missing or that's not being met, which is where this behavior is maybe coming up.
And I can't help, Amanda, as I'm listening, because you're giving advice as a parent, and what I'm hearing is not just the advice for my child, but for me. Am I communicating? What are my behaviors saying to my kid, right? Am I self-regulating myself when I'm parenting and when I'm in that situation, or am I as triggered and just behaving in my own counterproductive way? So super insightful, and I can't thank you enough for really this unique insight you've given into the world, not just of ABA, but just understanding behavior as a language. I think that is just such a neat principle to understand.
It is. Yeah. Well, Amanda, thank you so much
thanks for having me.
Being part of the show. This is another great episode of the Polaris Connection. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And now let's go do some good.